Well, hey there, friends. I had planned on doing this involving a couple more decks that I was waiting for, but one of them appears not to be arriving at any point soon. I have not heard or seen heads or tails of my new choice, Marseille. I did email the artist today and say, hey, is there any chance we can see if it's lost in the mail? And then the other deck that I had, I thought would be here by now, but looks like it won't be arriving until late next week, which is a surprise to me. So, I thought I would just, if you watch my channel, I don't really do walkthroughs much, but I do like to share my thoughts on decks, just in case anyone's curious about what I'm thinking. Sometimes I have a lot of guilt about making videos like this. Like, I never really set out to do them because so many people do them well, but also there's this part of me that's like, should I really be contributing to people's, pursuit of decks? But whatever. It's fun, and I find these videos relaxing. And as Kelly often says, it helps us see whether or not it's a deck we really want, and there are many decks that I've seen that I didn't want after watching walkthroughs. So here we have two decks that are, one is new, and one is a new version of something that's been around for a while. Both of them are not decks that I anticipated getting, but in the way we do, I got them. So I figured we would take a look. And so here's the new version of the Dame Darcy Gold Edition, and then this is Carnival at the End of the World. So let's take a look at the new one first. And this is, so it's on the thing, but it's Khan and Selesnik is the thing, but are the artists and authors. There's a book, I didn't get the book. They have sort of created this in a way that's similar to the Tarot of Musterberg, with like a similar origin story. Now, from a packaging, a design, even an artistic standpoint, it does remind me a lot of the Pagan Otherworlds, which I thought was actually a lot larger, but it's really very close in size, which I'm really surprised by, because I've been able to shuffle this makes me now have to look at this deck, because I honestly did not think I could shuffle this one, and I have no problem shuffling that one. Oh. I've always corner shuffled this deck because I thought it was too large. Maybe I've just, like, stretched out my my muscles or something. But you'll see, yeah, they're almost exactly the same size. That's interesting. Who knew? But there is a very, the cardstock is the same, and I think they're printed in the same place. But there's, it's a different deck. Obviously, the style's different. But there is a very similar, I don't know how to describe it. There's a similar energy to these two decks. Given the way that they sort of are packaged now, maybe they'll be working together at some point soon. But I just wanted to pull that out and sort of share. So let's get a little up close and personal with this one, and we'll do our best to fight the glare. So there are a series of cards that are not part of the deck, or that are part of the deck but that are not part of the traditional tarot structure. So there's this Orlovsky card, Madame Lulu, Dr. Falk, the Tempest, the Deluge, the Inferno. So these are cards that, in working with the deck, I have not included in my shuffles, because I generally do not include extra cards in the shuffles. But you can get a sense right out of the gate the kind of art style we're dealing with. And then this is the backs, which I really like. It's the same thing as the box. It's a really stylishly designed set, I think. I am a little curious about the book, but I don't read guidebooks ever, or even when I set out to, I frequently get bored with them very quickly. So I'm just going to ramble as I flip through and do it relatively quickly. This is probably a deck that, like the Pagan Otherworlds as well, might set off people who have reactions to textures. I mean, there is a creepy carnival element to this deck, because of course it's Carnival at the End of the World, so you're getting a mix of like Carney and Apocalypse. But in that, I think it's got a sense of humor about itself, which I like. Now, the Magician and the Hermit in the trumps, not my favorite, just because those are my favorite cards frequently in decks. But they're fine, you know, and they definitely fit in with the style of the deck. I really like the High Priestess and the Empress. They have a really cute, I hate that word, they have a really nice relationship to one another. So it's a very singular, you know, the cards have a very sort of simple, singular energy. It's very non-traditional imagery. There are nods to the Rider-Waite-Smith, but you can see this is not, you know, a typical Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's got a lot of different and very sort of off-center, and in some cases, kind of creepy, you know, energy to it. And I think that that's what it's meant to. It's what it wants to have. You know, here in Justice, of course, we've got Mott. That's the god's name. They're weighing hearts. So you can see the Hermit again, but it is the Hermit, you know. Wheel of Fortunes, I always say, are cards that I frequently do not like, but I do like this. I really like this Strength card. It's got a very 1920s feel to it. Here's the Hanged Man. And some of the cards, like Death, are pretty traditional. So I think, you know, is this going to become, as you know, as I'm talking through it, is this going to become a deck that I reach for every time? I don't know, probably not, but I do really think it's successful in a lot of ways. There are some things I don't like about it. This Tower card is really interesting. I mean, there's an environmental energy and an environmental message, I think, to this deck too, which I think, you know, shows through in the cards and in the situations of the cards. This is a really interesting moon, isn't it? So and there are a couple cards that I sort of like but others, you know, I think there's you know, I've talked about this in other walkthroughs or reviews. There's a wit to some decks, and this one has a wit. I don't know if I'll go through all the minors. You know, here we have sort of a two-headed person on a glacier. This clown character. There are some clowns and harlequins in this deck, and again, for people who find that off-putting, that's a thing that probably is worth knowing. This one is one that freaks me out just because it has like a clan quality to it that I really don't like. This one too. I don't think that's the intent, but it's just, with the world the way it is now, it's hard for me to not sort of be hyper aware of things like that. But by and large, they're really beautiful, I think, and my criticism, I guess, of the minors, if I had to have one, is that it's not always readily apparent, especially after shuffling, what suit you're looking at. So, for example, it's easy to tell in context that this is the Ten of Wands because of the fire, but outside of it, you know, it really takes that to show you. And the swords in particular, when I was reordering the deck, I found it difficult in some cases to know which suit, so that's something worth knowing. The courts are Page, Knave, Queen, and King. So here we go into cups, which are teacups in this deck. You know, here we have sort of an oil slick instead of that traditional three people dancing. You know, here, this is a very Hanged Man energy, doesn't it? But it's the four. This is a really interesting one because a shadow aspect of the Six of Cups to me is vanity. And so I think that that's a really interesting, it's a person made up of pictures of themselves or pictures of a person. So I'm going to go a little more quickly now just so you can get a sense. Page, Knight. Some of the cards are really dark and then some of them feel like they came right out of a children's book. It's, you know, it's really interesting. And here we get into swords. The three I think is interesting again because you know I don't love the heart pierced by three swords, and this is definitely odd, but it definitely, you know, has a quality to it. Here's the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And again, very different 9 and 10s from our 8, 9, and 10 from Rider-Waite-Smith, which again I always kind of appreciate. I was looking at the guidebook for a deck recently. I think that in Everyday Enchantment, and it was, in it she talked about how swords are the most difficult suit, and I thought, oh, yeah, I guess there are some systems that aren't like mine, and they do look at the swords that way, but I don't. It's the King of Swords for Game of Thrones, isn't it? I didn't watch that show. And then finally Pentacles, which are sort of, they look like loaves of bread. This is another card that likely will creep people out. There aren't a lot of them that are creepy, but they're there, and if you are easily creeped out, then you may find yourself not loving it. Eight, 9, 10, and here's the page. Knave, Queen, and King. So that is the Carnival at the End of the World. Again, I do like this deck. I like the Pagan Otherworlds. It may be a deck I admire, but don't necessarily read with all that much. Let me zoom out a skosh and just sort of show you how it shuffles. I mean, it shuffles just like the Pagan Otherworlds if you have that deck. I really thought this was smaller, but it's the same size, and it's the same cardstock, really, from what I can tell. So it shuffles just like a deck of playing cards. It's really smooth shuffling. It riffle shuffles well if your hands are large enough. I really do like the backs a lot. And in a reading, I think in the right situation or with the right person, I think that they would enjoy this. I think this is a deck I might read, use in a carnival setting, for example. So that is that one. So I like that a lot. I don't know, again, the verdict is still out on whether it's a deck that's going to get any use. But it's definitely a deck whose value I see. So that's that one. So from a new deck to a new version of an older deck, this is the Dame Darcy's Mermaid Tarot, very clearly. Here's a deck that I never expected to get. I remember seeing it on, I think, Daily Tarot Girl's channel a long time ago, and I thought, I really like the art style of that, but if you know me, you know that I don't like themed decks, and I don't... Like, I'm not a seafaring, sea shanty singing reader. And so I thought, well, there are other decks I want more. And then there have been a couple times where I went to grab it and it was sold out, the various editions. Another thing that happened with this deck, which, I hesitate to bring up, but I'm going to, is that there were some issues in theory in terms of copyright. There were some images that, seem to have been influenced to a great deal by another Mermaid deck. And if you want to know more about that, Benabel Wen has a blog post about it. But this all sort of erupted on the Eclectic Tarot Forum back when the Eclectic Tarot Forum was the Eclectic Tarot Forum. So I sort of stayed away from it in that case too. So why then did I get it? Well, a couple things happened. One is that I saw that the sort of influenced images, the things that may be potentially copyright problematic, were resolved to a more or less acceptable degree for folks. The other thing is this new edition came out and it looked nice. And I've seen a few walkthroughs of it, and I still really liked the art style. And then on Instagram one day I saw Liz Westwater's Instagram, and she had these cards in the sand, and I immediately got it, as I do. And so I think it was in part like fear of missing out, which is something that obviously we talk quite a bit about in our world. And I definitely experienced that. And this is one of those decks, like the Japaridza, like the Victorian Romantic, that like delighted me and completely surprised me. And I was so glad that I made the leap with it, because I actually can see using this deck. So again, there's many walkthroughs of this. There's Veronica Ju did a comparison of this in an earlier edition, and you know, I think this deck is still controversial because people really like or hate the cardstock. I really love this cardstock. Like, I am so excited about this cardstock, I can't even tell you. But it's got one of these great boxes that are becoming very, very standard in indie decks right now, which I'm living for. The new Marshmallow Marseille has this kind of box, this magnetic box. They're just really, really good, and they look great on a shelf, and they're compact, and they're good. There's an online book, which I haven't downloaded yet. Also, I will say that this deck came really thoughtfully packaged with, you know, a lot of like nautical themed pictures and some tissue paper, etc. So you get the title card that tells you where to get the book, and then you get a Dame Darcy card. And so again, I'm just going to sort of zoom in here, and we'll explore the pictures a bit. But I'm really surprised by how much I liked this, and I did a couple of readings for myself with it, and I thought, I really like this. And as a New Englander, it sort of feels right in a way. So it's got this beautiful matte gold that I love, love, love. The cardstock, I don't know what to compare it to. It reminds me a bit of early Wild Unknown editions. There's a couple Oracle decks. Oh gosh, let me see. I always do this. The Shamanic Medicine Oracle cards, it reminds me of. It has a very sort of waxy matte feeling, which I quite enjoy. And as such, I find it shuffles really well. Now, there's been some folks who say it's hard to shuffle. I actually don't find it hard to shuffle, and I have relatively small hands. So I'll demonstrate that, but I'm just going to sort of chat through it. It is a thick stack of cards, and there's no getting around that. But I will say this, I find it easy to shuffle. I just want to lick this cardstock. I think it's so good. And I think that, you know, from a diversity standpoint, this is actually a relatively diverse deck, which again, I was not expecting. Now, I think that has changed a little bit over the years. It's gotten more diverse, but I love handmade art. You know, I love it when the art feels like it was made and printed by a person. And to that end, this deck really succeeds for me. And I really, you know, again, it is a theme deck. There's a couple cards I don't like. You know, this Hierophant card's not my favorite, but it's fine. In this little sort of grotto here. It's also a very Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which of course you know is not my preferred system most of the time. But I do go back to it a lot. I've gotten to a point in my reading where the deck actually matters less than the question and the experience, you know what I mean? So I can use a Rider-Waite-Smith deck and apply my more numerological meanings. I can use a Pip deck and apply Rider-Waite-Smith sense memory to it. So I do not feel necessarily as hampered in as I once did. And you know, given the choice, I'm usually going to go with decks that I like, regardless of the system. I really like this Hermit. Wheel of Fortune cards, again, not my favorite. This is not my favorite Wheel of Fortune card. I really liked this Hanged Man. You know, what gay guy doesn't have a thing for sailors, I guess. But there's something about the color and the handmade quality of the art, and I really like this tower. Like this, it's really just really cool art, and it feels good. I really wish she would make a Halloween deck. I've heard there's an Alice in Wonderland deck in the works, which, well, you know, fine. How many Alice in Wonderland decks do we need? But far be it from me to tell an artist what to do. It is not my job. I just wish she would make a Halloween deck, because there aren't enough of those, and I want more. So here we get into the Suit of Wands. Again, it's really classic. You know what I mean? There's nothing kind of revolutionary here. Other than that, it's mermaids and sailors. I do wish, you know, there was a little bit more sort of, I won't even get into it. This face cracks me up. It's easy to see what suit you're looking at. It's easy to see what card it is. So we have pages, knights, queens, and kings. And it does have a playful quality to it, you know what I mean? Like if someone were working with grief, this may not necessarily be the deck I would reach for. But, you know, just for a general reading, I don't see why not. And again, this is someone who does not like themed decks. I'd kind of love a print of that, actually. I also love this sort of Jacobean, I think it's Jacobean era costumes. They're not quite Elizabethan. So yeah, I'm just gonna finish plopping through here. Again, this is, I think I think that it's successful, you know, and that's always an interesting thing for me. More shirtless sailor action. And what's interesting is that the style from card to card can be somewhat different, but it does often and always feel unified. It feels of a piece. I really like this one. I don't know. I like this dude. Shivering mermaids. So this was a surprise. I got it just because I thought, well, what if I want it and it goes out of print? Probably won't use it. I don't know. But I am happy I have it, and I do really like it a lot. So I love when that happens. So I'm just gonna zoom out a bit and show you how it shuffles, because again, I find it really easy to riffle shuffle. It doesn't bridge shuffle as well. You know what I mean? Oh, no, I'm wrong. I'm thinking of another deck, actually. It bridge shuffles fine. But yeah, I don't have any problem with it. And again, I have relatively small hands. I actually find that it overhand shuffles a little less well because of that cardstock. But I really like this cardstock. It's matte. It's sexy. It's like satin. Love it. I've become such a cardstock snob, which I wasn't. You know, when I started reading when I was 19, like, nobody cared about cardstock. The only cardstock I ever noticed was the inner child cards, because it was so freaking hard to shuffle. But, you know, you took the cardstock you got, but we've definitely, over the years, become much more interested in the quality of the cards, which I think is a good thing. And I'm always amazed by how indie deck creators are able to make so much. You know, you'd think when I started, I'm just gonna lay out some cards. When I started reading, you know, the indie decks were usually printed on index cards. You know what I mean? So like you got really bad quality paper. Everything's upside down. Ugh, I quit. You know what I mean? Like I got one deck many years ago that was really beautiful, but it just didn't, you know, it just sort of disintegrated in use because it wasn't meant to be shuffled. You know what I mean? Like it just was not paper stock that was designed for that. So anyway, here's how it looks laid out. So yeah, this is a look at a couple new decks to me, and I think, you know, previous versions of this deck had a different border or like no border, but I don't mind what's happened here. And I never had the original version, so it doesn't bug me. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. As always, I hope this was interesting, and I hope you're well, and we'll talk soon.